So should I go ahead and begin?
Mbak Takia, yes.
Wait a minute, everyone.
Okay, I didn't know if there was going to be introductions or anything like that, or if I should start. So please let me know. It's
Sorry,
always a little awkward on Zoom.
sorry, there will be some rituals.
Okay, that's fine. I wanted to make sure I wasn't slowing everyone down.
No,
so
you're not. You're not. Okay, Mbak Takia, I think you may start now, Mbak Takia.
Okay, go ahead.
Everyone, I'm sorry, please wait a minute. I am having a little problem. Okay. Very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all participants from different areas. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our webinar, and thank you for joining this webinar on the theme, the use of cartoon-based research. This webinar focused on exploration of cartoon-based research and teaching practices in early childhood education. To showcase innovative approaches and best practices in integrating cartoons into early childhood education settings. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start the program shortly. Therefore, may we have your cooperation to adjust your position and kindly turn on your camera during the session and make sure that your microphone is muted. This webinar will be recorded and broadcast live via YouTube. We ask for your permission to carry out this process. Okay, Bismillah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. Selamat sejahtera bagi kita semua. First, welcome to our Director of Semiosis, Professor Vina Adriani, MED, PhD. Welcome to our wonderful speaker, Professor Sally Campbell Pirie, University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Welcome to our Deputy Director for Program of Semiosis, Mr. Itfuti. Welcome to our Deputy Director for Administration of Semiosis, Dr. Alice Rosdiawati. And last, welcome to our Semiosis Head of Division and team, and also welcome to the committees and all participants of webinar. It is a pleasure to see you all. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce myself. My name is Takia. I am from the Knowledge Management Internship of Semiosis, and I will be the Master of Ceremony for today's meeting. This webinar will be delivered in English. Before we proceed any further, may I kindly request everyone to sit straight for the national anthem, Indonesia Raya, and Semio Color Entrance. Now, I would like to invite Director of Semiosis, Professor Vina Adriani, to deliver her opening remarks. Professor Vina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Takia. I promise it's going to be a short one. So, a very good morning, good evening to our esteemed keynote speaker, Professor Sally. And also, I would like to welcome all participants. So, Professor Sally, perhaps just to give you a bit of introduction, we are from SIMIO-CISEP, and SIMIO-CISEP stands for Southeast Asian Minister of Education Organization, Center for Early Childhood Care Education and Parenting. So we are a regional center in Southeast Asia, working closely with the Minister of Education Organization in Southeast Asia. So as a research center, I think it is important for us to learn more about the different types of research methodology. And I've been reading your work, and I've been very fascinated to learn more about the cartoon-based research that you have been doing. And I think it is important for my colleagues here in CMEO-CSEP to learn about that method. And because we feel that this topic is very important, we also extend the invitation to the public, and we are pleased to let you know that we have number of participants from lecture and also teachers and also government officers who are participating as participants in today's event. So I know it's very late for you in the States, so I'm not going to prolong my opening remark. I just would like to express my gratitude. I know you are extremely busy, so thank you very much for sparing your time to do this webinar with us. And I really hope that this will be the first from many more webinar, many more keynote that you will be doing. So hopefully one day we'll be able to invite you in person to come to Bandung, Indonesia. So thank you very much, and also thank you to all participants who have attended today's webinar. So I hope we are going to gain a very fruitful and meaningful discussion with Professor Sally. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was such a beautiful introduction. And I appreciated also the beautiful music and the video. It was really inspiring and lovely. And I recognized so many of the places. I myself was born in Asia, and I spent a lot of time in that part of the world, and it made me miss home quite a bit. So it's really lovely to be connecting with all of you here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I have a PowerPoint. I know you've probably seen a lot of PowerPoints. They're going to be long and boring, but I wanted to, because I'm a visual artist, I felt like it was a good idea to go ahead and have that present so we could look at it. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen.
Thank you very much, Professor Vina, for the welcoming remarks. And
Okay, great.
And before we start the webinar, okay, now I will introduce you our speaker, Professor Sally Pirie. It is an honor to have you here. Professor Sally Pirie is an anthropologist, visual artist, and qualitative methodologist. Her research interests include the anthropology of childhood and family, arts-based and comics-based qualitative and ethnographic research method. And she was born and grew up in northern Japan and graduated from Punahou School in Honolulu, Hawaii. She is currently a professor of child and family studies at the University of Massachusetts. I hope the time difference between Bandung and Massachusetts doesn't discourage the spirit of the webinar. Professor Sally, the time is yours.
Great, thank you so much again for such a beautiful introduction. I really appreciate that. I'm going to ask if, because I have the PowerPoint open, I can't see the chat. So if there are any questions in the chat, which I would encourage people to use, because sometimes we have questions while someone is speaking and we don't really have we don't want to lose the question waiting until the end. So if you have questions, put them in the chat. and I'll circle back around at the end and open that when I close the PowerPoint. Does that sound good? That way everybody can
Sure.
be thinking. This is a presentation, but I also want it to be a conversation. So, so I want to make sure that we have that happening throughout. All right, so I have a PowerPoint just to kind of go through things, but what I'm going to be talking about here this morning is comics-based research and learning. And it's a little bit different than I think how a lot of people think about comics in research. So I'm going to take you through some different things, and in the end, we're going to do kind of an exercise together before we have a time for questions. So I hope that sounds okay. So I get the slides to advance. Also, all the images that I'm using in the work are all things that I've created, except for were otherwise indicated. So these are all original pieces. They're not uncredited. So I'm Sally Pirie. I'm a professor of child and family studies here at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst in North America. And I am a cartoonist. I was a newspaper cartoonist before I became an anthropologist of childhood. And I always thought that because I was an artist before, it was something that I had to put into my previous life. It was something that I had to think about as being gone from my life and not part of my work, because I thought that being a scientist in childhood, especially in education and curriculum and all of those things, meant that I had to do science. And that meant quantitative science. It meant something without art in it, just very, very conventional scholarship. And when I was in my doctoral program at the University of Colorado, my advisor in that program said that if I did that, I would have a bifurcated existence and I would be unhappy because I'd have the parts of myself separated into two places. And I wasn't quite sure what to do with that. But then I wrote the very first research methods book that I think has ever been done, illustrated style. This, what you see on the screen, is an example of my book about doing research with childhood. And that sort of put me on the map and got me started thinking about what could we do in research with pictures and comics and drawing. And I'm looking at the CMEO backdrop with the little children dancing on either side that a lot of people have as your Zoom backdrop. And I want to kind of think about that and think about pictures of people and things and how it gives us energy in what we're doing. So I started writing these books. They're called the Shane books, Shane the Lone Ethnographer. It's very silly kind of stuff, but actually quite substantive, and some of the very first comics-based research that was ever done. So that's how I got my start in that arena. And I've been at the University of Massachusetts now for almost 20 years doing this kind of scholarship and also conventional scholarship. So today, here's what we're going to go through in this lecture, which I hope will be a little bit participatory. I want to introduce some things. I want to talk about arts-based research in general. And I'm wondering if I could just have a quick show of hands. Let's see if I can get this to work. People who know anything about arts-based research. Just a quick show of hands or an indication in the chat. People who know anything about arts-based research, or is it something completely new to everyone?
I would say it's something quite new here in Indonesia, Sally.
Oh, it's quite new, so people haven't have people heard about arts-based research? Is that something that people have heard about, that people are doing somewhere?
I think we've heard about it, but
Okay.
yeah, in general, positivism is very powerful here in Indonesia. So
It's
yeah.
new, and it's somebody in Brunei.
We
Okay.
have someone from Brunei, Sally.
Yeah, it's new for you. Thank you, Diana. Has anybody wanted to try it and not been sure how to do it? In the Philippines, it's new there. Miss Christie, I lived in the Philippines when I was 5 years old. I have a great love for the Philippines. Anybody else? Okay, so it's kind of new to a lot of people. So I'm going to give you some foundations of how we think about arts-based research. And then from there, we're going to go into comics-based research, which is a specific kind of arts-based research, and that's what I do. We're going to think about comics in early childhood research in particular. And that's a time when we can start to ask some questions about the kinds of questions and the kind of work that you want to be doing, and how we can use arts-based research for that purpose. I want to talk about drawing ethnographically, because we can all draw. And I want to talk about using CBR in 2 mini steps. I want to think about drawing a portrait, either of yourself or of an object, and visual memoing and data analysis. And then at the end, we'll have times for questions and comments. And I'm going to show you some examples of comics-based research work so you can really see exactly what it is. I think a lot of the times when we talk about methodology, specifically methodology in childhood research, sometimes you never get a chance to see exactly what it is. And so I want you to have a chance to see exactly what this kind of stuff looks like, because it is quite different. So the context for what we're doing for this work, and I keep moving all the little people's faces over here so I can see the whole slide. The context is that we're human beings telling stories in often prickly or weird or hard contexts. And that's the nature of qualitative research. And it's the nature of work in childhood. We're doing some things that are sometimes innovative, sometimes difficult. Sometimes we're giving people information they don't always want. It can be beautiful and it can be difficult. There's great power in making something physically with your hands that's tangible, like a drawing. And getting grounded and connected through tactile experience, like drawing, can help us focus when things are slippery. I know there's a long tradition in ethnographic research in childhood to do a lot of drawing in the field. And I think one of the reasons that's so common in people's field notes is because it's very easy to lose that grounding when you're doing a lot of really sustained field work and research and education, and especially with young children. Art and comics and drawing in particular have had a historical place in early childhood research, but not necessarily in the way I'm going to talk about. That said, people doing research in childhood have kind of a head start on thinking about art in research and art as research. I also want to kind of put this here. My thesis chair, Professor Marky Lecomte, told me that if I was looking at a theoretical concept or a finding or a research study and I couldn't draw a picture of it, I did not truly understand it. So I do believe that that's a strength of comics-based research, the idea that by drawing a picture of something, we can understand it more completely and more clearly. Last but not least, when we do something different, like drawing, we can sometimes pry loose a little bit of the bored parts of our mind or the different kinds of things that we're doing that need to be inspired in different ways. So anytime we try something different, even if it doesn't work, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it results in publications that may be kind of challenging, it's still good because it gets us to think about things in a little bit of a different way. Oh, there we go. And this is something I wanted to introduce. This is a poem by a North American poet, by Shel Silverstein. And I think it's appropriate for how we're going to be talking about research methods together today. Ooh, my screen just opened. Sorry about that. And it goes like this. Have you ever heard of tiny Melinda May, who ate a monstrous whale? She thought she could, she said she would, so she started right at the tail. And everyone said, you're much too small, but that didn't bother Melinda at all. She took little bites and chewed very slow, just like a good girl should. And in 89 years, she ate that whale because she said she would. The reason I share this is because in talking about something as big as arts-based research, especially because a lot of people, it's new for them, or comics-based research, which is also new for people, it can feel like doing something really big, like eating a whale, right? It's a very big task to eat the whole whale. But with enough small bites, we can eat the whale. So what I'm giving you today are some very, very, very small bites of what is ultimately a much bigger enterprise. So let's talk about some foundations of arts-based research. So arts-based research, and again, if you've got questions, pop them in the chat and I'll see them. So I want you to stop me if I'm going too fast or I'm talking about things that don't make sense or you need some grounding. Just let me know because this is your lecture and we're in conversation. So please don't be afraid to use that chat, please, please. Because I can't see your faces with the PowerPoint open, but I can see the chat. So arts-based research, it's been happening in many formats for a very, very long time. People have been doing this all over the world for a very long time, but we only have recently developed a name for it. So basically, thinking artistically, anytime you make art, do we have anyone in the group who is a dancer? Do we have any dancers in the group? Do we have any painters? Do we have any people who cook or who draw or who make a traditional handicraft? These are all artistic forms. And I think any of you who do these things would agree that there's a systematic way of doing it. I think about my grandmother did a lot of fiber arts and fiber work and making quilts, which is it's a very typical North American handicraft. And so she would make those, and when she'd teach me to do it, it was very, very systematic. First, you did one thing, next, you did the next thing, and it had the same systematic qualities as a qualitative methodology or a quantitative methodology, but I think primarily in terms of qualitative. So, thinking artistically is as systematic, if not more so, as any research methodology that you might be familiar with. And it has always been this way. So, arts based research, and this is, we're getting into a very standard definition here, can be defined as the systematic use of the artistic process, the actual making of artistic expressions in all the different forms of the arts, as a primary way of understanding and examining experience by both researchers and the people that they involve in their studies. It draws inspiration, concepts, processes, and representations from the arts broadly defined. So, if you are a dancer, and that is your artistic expression, and you know the systematic ways in which a dance is put together and performed, you would draw inspiration or research from those processes and from those steps broadly defined. The difference between art and arts-based research is that we use the systematic processes of the arts, of art making and art engagement and art dissemination, to do research. It doesn't just stand alone. And further, we know that only good science can make good art, and only good art can make good science in the world of arts-based research. Then we get into larger questions about what is, good art, which is not an easy question. And typically when I think about what is good art, I think about what art feels good and is appropriate in the setting. Because if we get into who decides what is good art, that's a whole can of worms. So all forms of arts-based research are typically used in a few ways. The first is data collection. So you might take visual field notes, or use art making as a way to generate participant material, or you might gather participant art. Has anyone in the group collected visual materials like children's drawings in a study, in research? Has anyone done that? And again, I can't see the little faces, but I can see the chat. So type in the chat if you have done that. Okay, Vina has, good. Diana, yeah. So that's a kind of data gathering, a data collection that you've done with, I only my child's artwork. So do I. I have a lot of it all over my office, absolutely. But that too, those are artifacts, and that's art-based material. Is there anyone in the group who has taken visual field notes, has drawn drawings when you were doing observation in a setting with children? Has anyone done that? Okay. So that's also a form of collecting data using art. I tend to think primarily in visual art because I'm a visual artist, but there are many, 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 many kinds of art that you could be collecting. Something that I've come across in a couple different contexts in childhood arts-based research is when children in an early childhood setting put together a play or do dramatic play. That can be a form of art data that you could be collecting or gathering because the children are generating a performance. So that's something that's very, very potent and very important. The second way that we use arts-based research is through data analysis. And this one is the hard part, but it's actually my favorite way of doing arts-based research. So for example, you might create art as a means of engaging with data and conducting analysis, and it might help you understand yours and others' experiences and distill what story you want to tell. We're going to talk later about visual memoing to process your own coding of the data. But when you're doing data analysis, maybe you draw a comic or make a painting or do a dance or make a quilt or sew something or cook something or sing something, and you do it to help you think deeply about the data. And it's entirely possible you never share this art with anyone. It's just something that you do to connect to the data and think through it in a systematic way. This is I think the most powerful way to use arts-based research for me. That's how I think about it. And last but not least, we have dissemination of findings. This one is the most common. I think when people think about arts-based research, they think about an artistic product that's put out there into the world for people to see, to understand the research and the findings and the significance of the study. And it is the most common. Writing a comic, choreographing a dance, making a quilt, any a performance, ethnodrama is a very big, monologues, all those things. Those are ways of using the arts to disseminate. So instead of writing a conventional research paper like you might publish in a journal, an arts-based researcher would generate a piece of art that would then hopefully be published in a journal, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So let's talk about comics-based research. So comics-based research is a kind of arts-based research, but the art making part is making comic art. So it's the systematic use of comic making processes, which are known to comic artists and resulting in recognizable comic work to research. And it's the generation of analytic and published research comics. So remember the book I showed you at the very beginning, the comic book that I wrote about research methods? That's comics-based research. I'm using the processes of comic making that I learned as a professional cartoonist, but any of you can do today, starting today, just looking at this PowerPoint, using those to do research, to make meaning from what I have going on in the field. So, oops, I didn't mean to go back quite so far. I have a very touchy mouse. So how many of you feel confident that you know what a comic is? A piece of comic art. Now, I think you all know I'm a cartoonist, and what you're seeing on the screen right now is one of my drawings. And I think it's always fun to draw a comic-based piece when I'm talking about comics. But I've also taken some of the words out and put them to the left side of the screen, because otherwise it's sometimes hard to read my handwriting, and I want it to be accessible. And there are reasons why I hand letter, and I can answer questions about that later on. But a comic, all a comic is words and pictures together. And Scott McCloud, who is one of the more prominent cartoonists in the early phases of when we started to think about cartoons and how they could be used, he wrote that comics are juxtaposed pictorial and other images in a deliberate sequence intended to convey information or produce an aesthetic response in view. So if you look at the very bottom of the screen, you'll see there's some little tadpoles turning into frogs. You don't even need any words to know that that's a sequence. So comic art is words and images, or sometimes just images in a sequence telling a story. And they can be in little boxes or they cannot. There's lots of different ways to do it, but that's a comic. Now, comic-based research uses comic conventions as research tools. Okay, that's the thing, it's the tool. Just like when we do ethnographic research, participant observation is a tool, it's a methodological tool. In comics-based research, we use the comic pieces as a tool. So for example, the differences in the page layout, the communication with line, the authorial voice and the movement. And you can see in the example I've given you, you see the little tadpoles, right? They're having a conversation. And you can look at them and you can tell one of the tadpoles is thinking because there's a little thought bubble, and the other one is talking because it's a speech bubble. And these are Western comic conventions as well. There may be comic conventions in the literature specific to your cultural context that I don't understand, but are really having traction and really very useful there. So I want you to not think that these are the only conventions. These are just the ones that are most commonly used in Western productions, right? Things like lines that speak. You can see I'm pointing at the screen like you can see it. I know you can't. If you look at the screen, there's little hearts and squiggly lines and things that tell us movement. There's a box that tells us that the author is speaking. There's all kinds of things in terms of how the page is laid out that we don't even notice when we're reading, but it's telling us information, right? And when we're using that in research, that's a shortcut that we can use. That's a tool that we could use in CBR. So the other things, there's like a red line in the middle of we won't worry about it. The other thing about comics-based research is there's such thing as a splash page where the page goes all the way across, and that's intended to create momentum and excitement. There's all kinds of other things like the bleed where the image goes all the way over to the page. And there's all kinds of comic vocabularies, big words, big images, big drawings that are intended to look comic-y, to evoke a kind of feeling. And you can use them or not use them, but it's a different way to express meaning than what you might do with more conventional writing in a scholarly text. So comics and research are different from comics for early literacy development. So when we're doing comics-based research, the comics making is the methodology, not the substance of what we might do. And when using comics for teaching children or supporting teaching, the comic is a literary genre, not a research method. However, comics-based research is fantastic for varied use in research with children. Have any of you done research with children using comics? Is that something you've done in order to to facilitate reading or to get them to engage with a project? Have any of you had that experience? Again, I can't see the little people. The little people disappeared, but I can still see the chat. So when we think about comics in the context of learning in classrooms and children, I think there's a lot of crossover, but it's very, very different from early literacy development. Because remember, when we do comics-based research, cartoon-based research, we're using those comic-making tools either in our hands, in the children's hands, in the teacher's hands, in other adults' hands, in anybody's hands to generate a text, an analytical text, a data text, or an interpretive text. So comics-based research includes a couple different things. It includes words and images that come together to create a multimodal text, and you can see my little tadpoles having a multimodal text. Stories that are told in a linear or simultaneous fashion, and this is an important thing. Even though the way I think about comics, I can't help but think about them in a very Western canonical sense. I think that telling stories from our research, telling stories about what we know about childhood and about children, about childhood research in particular, there are many more ways to tell it than the Eurocentric linear story. Things happen in different ways. And the comics-based research, I think, gives us one tool to decolonize how we think about telling those stories. I know that learning to tell a story in a scientific article is completely linear, but drawing a story can feel very different and perhaps feel more integral to what we're doing. Another important point about comics-based research is that the author's voice is made explicit. I think I showed you, I'm sorry, I'm coughing. It's allergy season here in North America. So I think I showed you, do you see the box? You probably can't see my mouse, but where it says, soon the tadpole found himself in love. We know based on comic conventions that that's the author speaking. Now, in research, sometimes we have to work very, very hard to separate out what is the data speaking versus what is the author or the field worker or the researcher saying. And that can be made very explicit in comics-based research. So that's an affordance of comics-based research that I think is very important, especially when you're doing work that is political, when you're doing work that does involve children and high stakes outcomes around learning and care. It's very important that the author voice be made explicit. Now, a big part of CBR data analysis is something called the restorying process. And this is something that's very, very important. And we're going to get to data analysis in just a minute. But this is very important because part of what we do, I don't know if any of you have had the feeling of finishing a study, you have data, you're trying to write about it to write your paper or your dissertation or your book or what have you. And you have that moment of trying to convert all of that experience into a message, into a finding, into something you can disseminate. In comics-based research, we're doing that not just with ideas, we're also doing it with pictures. So Marcus Weaver Hightower, who I cite here on this page, is one of the biggest sort of writers and thinkers around comics-based research and comics-based, ideas. And he calls it restoring. I'm just going to read you the quote. I know it's long, but it's very good. So bear with me. He says, narrative researchers commonly restory their data, shaping the interview data to be more chronological or compelling, turning the interview into a sequential art story. He says he was forced to make all the choices about moment selection, framing, what to include, words to include, and flow around the page. And these choices amounted to data analysis, for he was using the heuristic choices of sequential art production, of comic writing, to decide what was important and how it should be framed. Here, the heuristics are visual as well as verbal, and it's an essential reflection on the task. So there's a couple different advantages of comics-based research, right? So first, writing and drawing are fun. How many of you think that fun is important in our research in childhood and families and schooling? I would love to see in the chat if anybody thinks it should be fun. If you don't think it should be fun, that's okay. I won't be mad at you. But I do think that our work should be fun. I think that there should be joy in the work of inquiry. I agree. Thank you, Christy. Yes, there should be fun. Definitely. Thank you, Diana. It keeps us engaged. And also, we need to feed ourselves. I think that there's a very, and I keep calling it a very Western canonical, neo-colonialist idea that we should be sacrificing ourselves and our joy somehow to work. I don't think so. I think there should be joy in the work. And writing and drawing are fun. I love writing. I love drawing. I love science. I love childhood. Thank you, Archie. Um, and I want art to be part of that, to share that joy, but also to make my findings compelling so other people are reading what I think is important. Also, sometimes drawing helps scholars more clearly understand their data. I know for me, and this isn't true for everyone, but for me, when I sit down and draw a comic about what I have going on my field site or with my data, I get to a deeper place with it. And you have to be careful, of course. You need to think about subjectivity. You need to think about what you're doing in the field. You need to think about those findings and that information. But I get to a place I don't think I could get to if I wasn't doing that work of restoring. Remember, restoring, the idea that we are transforming something into a comic and doing so getting deeper, right? The third, I believe that the process of drawing and writing, or even just drawing, creates complexity and nuance, and it gives you affordances for those things. When you draw a comic about your research, you're not making it more simple, you're just making it more clear. And you can have clarity and complexity at the same time. I believe that comics-based work inherently decolonizes Eurocentric linearity. I also think that increasingly the scholarly publication game is changing to accommodate this and other forms of arts-based work. And as such, more doors are opening to scholars coming from different places doing different kinds of work in journals that are willing to accept other forms of equally robust scholarship. And it displaces the primacy of conventional texts as the academic lingua franca, right? There's a wonderful quote from Elliot Eisner who says, "Are you concerned that the forms through which humans represent their conception of the world have a major influence on what they are able to say about it?" I, for one, would like more people and different people to be able to say more. And I think comics-based research is one way to do that. One of many, but my favorite way. There are, of course, disadvantages as well to comics-based research. Sometimes it is hard to let go of conventional text and let images speak. I have a very hard time with this. You can look at this page that I illustrated on the right side of the PowerPoint, and you'll see there's a lot of words. That's way too many words, because I was trained as an academic, like we all were, to write a lot of material. We're trained to just sit down and produce writing. And I know Professor Adriani and I are both editors on a journal, and we read conventional manuscripts all the time, and it's writing, 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 writing. It's hard to let the images speak because they're open to interpretation in a different way, and that creates uncertainty and discomfort. Hand lettering words is difficult because it compels economy. You can't say as much as you'd like to say, so you have to be relatively economical, and sometimes that's very hard. Professional development is almost impossible in comics-based research. It's very hard to find someone who can teach people to do it. I can do that, but here I am by myself. I do run a comics-based research lab here at the University of Massachusetts, and anybody who wants to be involved can be involved via Zoom. We try to support each other, people who are interested in this kind of work, but it's very, very difficult to find that, and that is a drawback. Also, a lot of people want to develop as artists. I mean, we all have a lot, you wouldn't be in this room if you weren't interested in research and have training in that, but it's much easier to get training as a researcher and a scholar and a teacher and anyone else who works with children. It's a lot harder to get training as an artist. I think that there's different kinds of art training, but as a comics-based comics researcher, there's not a lot out there, and that can be very difficult. And last but not least, accountability regimes often do not count comics-based research. I was once relatively recently, offered a very nice job at a British university. But they didn't want me to do any comics-based work because it did not count for their research excellence frameworks. And those of you who have worked in the UK know that that's the way that funding is developed for universities. They have to have so many conventional publications that meet a certain goal. And I don't do conventional publication. I do stuff that looks like this. So I didn't go there because that wasn't, it was difficult. And I'm aware for people who want to publish and want to have that kind of influence and want to have publications to count for their own career advancement, it's very risky to do comics-based work, and I'm very sensitive to that. So that is a disadvantage. I put this slide in here because sometimes you need to let the images speak. Sometimes you need to just publish something that's just a picture and let the feelings associated with the image speak for you. This image is something that's coming to press right now in a journal article. It's about girlhood studies. And I won't tell you the long story behind the octopus here, but I wanted to deliberately to publish a page of research text that had no words because images also can speak. Now, I want to give you some examples of comics-based research in data gathering. And I'm sorry that G is kind of hanging off the end there. I reformatted this and sometimes there were some problems. Because remember, we talked about, I'm not going to go all the way back to that slide, but we talked about comics-based research as collecting data, analyzing data, and disseminating data, right? Those are the three things that we do with arts-based research. In CBR, when I'm gathering data from research with children, this is how I use it. And what you're looking at is a comic that I had children write as something for me to collect. So for example, I gave all the children in one of my research studies little blank books. And I told them that on every page, I wanted pictures and words, right? Even if they had to have their adults write the words for them. And I wanted to get at some of their experiences. And something that's very interesting that I don't know that I could have gotten if I did an interview. I don't like interviews with children anyway, but if I did an interview, I'm not sure I could have gotten. If you look very carefully at the picture of the truck on the on the left side of the page, in the windows it says boy, 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 and at the top it said the first word I ever said was boy, over and over and over again. And this child was very, very interested in being seen as a boy. And they lived in a rural setting. These are farm people. And so it's a tractor. It's the most masculine farm equipment you can find. And he's written boy, boy, boy in the windows. So when he did this comic and I sat down and read it with him, it wasn't my asking stupid adult questions. Instead, this child read their comic to me. And I was able to get so much more out of it than if I had just asked them how they felt about being a boy. On that note, I want to talk a little bit about using comics in research with young children. And after this, I will continue on talking about data analysis and dissemination. But research with young children or young people should be treated as a different enterprise entirely than research with adults. I know you know this. A lot of people want to interview children, and I don't think it works. One of the best examples of using words and pictures in research comes from Angel et al., who came up, these are people in public health, who came up with research mechanisms called draw, write, tell, DWT, where they literally had children draw and then write or have someone scribe and then tell. And the most important of those things is really the part where the children tell, because the locus of power is with that child who has a drawing, something they made that they can interpret in different ways depending on who's asking the questions, and they're able to give us the information differently. So again, it places the power of information giving in the hands of the young people. Just like in this example, when I sat down to talk to these children about the comics that they wrote for me, and the prompt was, tell me about your life. It was very general. They were able to read to me. And none of them read the words that are written here. They told me different things because they had the power to do so. So comics-based research and data analysis is my very, very favorite part because I use visual memoing to get deeper into the data. So I typically go through notes and sketches, which I made to consider, my data as I was reading, or I look at the sketches I made in my fieldwork, and I think about what images are pricking at my ears, which are the ones that are most interesting. And I draw and draw and draw until I start to think about the metaphors that are in play and what works. This piece that right here in front of you is something that I drew for a methodology chapter about doing data analysis with comics. And basically all it is drawing until the metaphors and the ideas come about that might help you get to a different and more abstract place with data than you might get if you were doing a more traditional coding mechanism. This is another one. This was a research comic that I wrote. I wrote it with, I never wanted to publish it. I wrote it on the back of a menu in a truck stop, which is an American restaurant on the side of the road. When I was doing field work here in the US, I was in the field the day after Donald Trump was elected president here. And that was a very frightening day for a lot of us, especially around some of his politics, around the childhood populations that I work with in particular. And I was very frightened, and the people I was working with were frightened. And I didn't know what to do with that experience. And even though I've been trained as an ethnographer and I've been trained as a social scientist, I did not know how to manage that or how to analyze that part of the data and the experience. So I wrote a research comic about it, and I called it Research in Pain. And it was picked up and eventually published, but I didn't write it to publish. I wrote it as, kind of like this: how to get back into the data by drawing pictures about it. And then last but not least, we have research, CBR in dissemination. Um, and you can look at this page. This is a published page. I don't use the little comic squares, but a lot of other people do. But this is typically what we think about when we think about comics-based research, is we use it to tell a story. So I published this page to talk about a particular person's experience with a very scary moment. And you can see how I used drawings that I'm going to show you in a minute that came out of visual memoing to really get that idea across. And if you just look at it, you can kind of see that. Now, oops, what happened? Okay. So if you look at this picture, you'll see that I'm trying to get a very specific energy across. I've made specific choices, and I'm disseminating that. Now, it might not have all of the heft of a research article necessarily, or as a more conventional research article, but there are different levels of access. Anybody can look at this image and get something out of it. And it is not a benign image. No one is going to look at this and think, oh, this is a happy image. This is a happy moment, with the colors and the way that I wrote and the way you have to kind of twist your head around to read the cursive English and the angry person. It's very, very clear that this is bad. But a scholar who's familiar with the literature can go in and understand why. So there's a lot of different areas of purchase. So I'm assuming that everybody, having heard me speak, really wants to be a comics-based researcher. Am I right? Everyone here is going to immediately take this up and join my lab and do it, right? I hope so. Yes, thank you. Yes. So if you want to do comics-based research, again, we're just having the tiniest little bite of the whale tonight, this morning. Tiniest little bite. There's so much more. And if people, I know that Professor Adriani has my email address. I want you to email me. I can send you things if you really want to pursue this. But a couple things you can start doing right now before I send you any emails. You should start drawing every day. And I want you to focus on not how it looks, but on how it feels. So that's difficult for people, but drawing is a kinesthetic moment. So practice drawing every day. And that can be drawing objects, it can be drawing people, it can be drawing whatever is acceptable within your particular tradition to draw. Second, keep a sketchbook. This is your raw material. You should not let this dry up. And I carry around, actually, I can't show you because it's across the room in my briefcase, but I actually carry around a little Ziploc bag with watercolor paints and pens and pencils and erasers, so that if I'm sitting at the bus stop, I can sit down and draw something, just to kind of keep a hand in. And I keep a tiny little sketchbook all the time, and I glue things in there, and I draw things, and I paint things, and I write notes to myself, and I always try to be drawing something, because the more you draw, the better you get at it. I have never had a lesson, an art lesson, ever. I just draw all the time. It's not a skill you have to go to class to get. You can do it. Seek out community and professional development in your art. Find other people to draw with. I was lonely and the only person doing comics-based research at my university, so I made sort of a club. I call it a lab, and we get together every other week, and we just draw together and talk about our art and talk about our projects and talk about what we need to do better science. And that's all you need. And you also, I love Instagram because you can connect with all kinds of people doing comics-based research there and nonfiction comics. The next thing that everybody needs to do is hone your chops. Get good at being a drawer observer in the field. but also a person who draws from life. Drawing, even though a lot of cartoonists just draw things from memory, being there is very, very important. So something else I try to do in my sketchbook is I try to draw things I see. I talk about waiting for the bus. I take the bus to work and I sit at the bus stop and I draw what I see. Because drawing something, observing it in life, even if it's just like this pen, um, it's a practice of learning to see. And really good research in childhood and family is a process of learning to see. And last but not least, good comics-based researchers know other comics-based researchers. I encourage you to read everything you can and follow a few interesting people who do this kind of work. And there are lots of people who are not publishing in conventional publication spots, but I can help you find their work. And again, I'm actually going to do it right now just so you have it. I'm going to put my email address in the chat and you can email me and I'll send you whatever you would like to read. It's in the chat and you can send me an email and I'll send you PDFs or other information that you might need if you're interested in developing as a comics-based researcher, because there's very, very good work and it's very accessible and very instructional. I don't know why my PowerPoint is advancing without my permission tonight. All right. This is an actual page from my sketchbook. And this is, I'm showing you this because I want you to see how messy it is and how strange it is and how I have lists of things to do and grocery lists. And I don't know if people know White Rabbit. It's my very favorite candy from when I was a little girl in mainland China. It's my witness, right? Your sketchbook is where you keep everything, your field notes, your doodles, your marginalia, your sketches of life, all the important stuff. Vincent van Gogh called his sketchbook his witness. And trying to draw a little bit every day in your sketchbook will help you build that muscle. So I want to talk a little bit about some mini methods in CBR, but I do want to know how I'm doing for time. I don't want to keep everybody from their lives. Bina, am I doing okay for time?
Yes, you are doing okay, no problem.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure I don't take up too much time. So there are a couple steps. I put 3, but I actually took the last one off because I was worried we wouldn't have enough time. So I want to talk about the portrait and I want to talk about visual memoing. So the first mini workshop I want to do, and this is the smallest imaginable little workshop ever, is about drawing from life. It's the most important lesson from ethnography, qualitative methods, and cartoonists often forget it. I put beauty moves because we know when we see things in life, it's a very, very different thing than seeing something on television or even, a picture on our phone. It teaches us to question representationalism and gets us into that place of vulnerable making kinetic art. So what you need, and I know people were not planning on this. I'm going to stop the share really quick because I want to show you this really quickly. All right. Oh, I can see you now. Great. It sounds like, oh, yes, I'm speaking English. Okay. I want everyone to get a pen, something to draw with, if you're comfortable. If you're not comfortable, you can just follow along. I know not everyone is comfortable rendering human shapes and forms, so you can always draw something else, or you can just sit and watch. It's up to you. And I want you to get a piece of paper. I like index cards because index cards feel flexible. If you do your work on a little teeny tiny piece of paper, the stakes do not feel as high and people are generally more comfortable trying to draw things. So what I want you to do is we're going to spend just a couple minutes doing this because this is a good practice to get into and a place you can start in your sketchbook. I want you to practice drawing something very, very slowly on your little piece of paper. And I want you to try not to look at the paper while you do it. This can be something right in front of you. It can be, I have a soda can, I might draw that, anything. And we're going to spend 2 minutes drawing on your own. Okay. Is everybody good with that? I know you weren't expecting participation, but here we are. And we're not going to judge ourselves. So when I say go, I want you to get your piece of paper and your pen, and we're going to draw very, very slowly for 2 minutes, trying very hard not to look at the paper. We're going to look at the object. I'm going to look at my McDonald's cup that I have on my desk. All right. Begin. But really focus on those details. Don't look. Very very, very, very slowly. Okay, it's 2 minutes. Does anyone want to hold up and share what they drew? You can see it. I see. Oh, thank you, Dr. Adriani. I saw that. Great. Wonderful. I love it. Oh, I love this. Oh, this is great. These are wonderful. I drew my cup. You can kind of see it right there. How did it feel to draw something knowing you'd be showing people what you drew? Did it feel, oh, I love it. Oh, it looks so good. I don't know what your name is because it just says MUSCECCEP, but that's beautiful. It has a lot of comic energy. I love it. Is there anybody else that I'm missing? Is there on the other page? No. How did that feel? How did it feel to draw something knowing that you were going to show somebody else?
More focus, more concentrate.
Focus, yeah. Oh, Aziza, I love it. Oh, that's so sweet, Aziza. Christy, that's beautiful. Yeah, he's more focused. It's a different thing to draw for someone. Beautiful. Thank you, Aziza. Thank you, Christy. Two things I want you to take from this. One, every one of you can draw because you just did it. Two, going slow and drawing from life. Well, more than two, I guess. I'm going to give you like 4 things. Going slow and drawing from life generates better work and it creates focus. When you're doing data collection in the field, when you're analyzing things, you're drawing, you're focusing, you're getting into that place. The third thing is when you draw knowing that someone's going to see the work, it creates a very different energy in your art. And that's why when we do comics-based research, we always share it with people because you want people to see what you're doing, even if it's embarrassing or it makes you feel funny or you think your drawings look strange. No, when you share that work, you focus in a different way. You need to show your art to people. You need to show people what you're doing. And this is exactly the kind of stuff that goes into your sketchbook every day. Just 2 minutes every day drawing something will make you a better illustrator. It'll make you a better artist. It'll make you a better researcher because it's that focus that comes from that experience. All right, I'm going to go back to the share screen so I can finish up. Okay. So this is an example of something that I drew. This is that blind contour drawing where you're just drawing something just using the most basic lines. These are my feet. I just drew them because I thought it would be fun. And then I wrote some text around it. And then sometimes people say they can't necessarily draw, but I believe that if you can write a letter in any language, then you can draw. And this artist is a person called Ed Imberly, who says that you can make anything you want to make using just a few shapes, circles and lines and squares. So if he can do that with just circles and lines and squares, then any of us can do it. So the next thing I want to talk to you about, and this is less of a mini workshop and more of just a quick overview, because again, I do want us to have time to talk, is visual memoing. This is something that I talked about in the context of data analysis because I think it's very, very important. When you're doing data analysis, one of the most important things you can do is memo. So writing down your thoughts and analytic notes that help make your ideas big, especially if you're theory building. It's a place to park your ideas and expand on memory and flex your brain. I do this visually and use my blind contour or my 2-minute drawing skills to make it work. So typically when I'm doing CBR data analysis, I lean heavily on free drawing or doodling while I'm going through the data. And I've written about this elsewhere, but this is a good first step. Does anybody remember the dissemination piece that I did? So while I was reading this story that this child told me about their experience, I was drawing, and you can see the drawings around things and the other stuff, and those shapes, you'll recognize that shape. See the shape? The head. So that it came true, it came to life, it came to fruition in the final piece that I did. But that's legitimately, those are the, sorry, scrolling here. Those are the sketches that I did on that data while I was reading it. I was drawing and thinking. By doing visual memoing, which is just doodling while you're reading through your data, while you're doing that coding and that analysis, that's generating metaphors and images and getting you into that trance-like place that you need to be able to think about things. It gives you clues about what your hot and cold spots are, where your attention lives. What are you paying attention to? What are you not paying attention to? It provides powerful potential metaphors. It's helped by reading widely. So when I'm doing data analysis and work in childhood, I'm typically reading a lot of other things to really draw those ideas in. And it provides an alternative to coming up with verbal codes, as these often privilege a certain way of thinking. I think I've spoken more than once about how we are trained to do very conventional scholarship, and that's a very Eurocentric model. And I think there's different ways of doing scholarship and thinking that we can access if we're doing these drawings. So when you think about what images came up, what they are, you want to prick up your ears and really pay attention. Think about what's a literal representation and what's a little bit like open coding. What is the energy? And then go from there. So now it's time for some questions. And there's a question in the Q&A. I'm going to stop the share. I know you all love actually, I'll leave my whale up there for just a minute. There's a question in the Q&A that says, does art-based research also apply to digital artwork? Absolutely. Digital artwork is a completely legitimate form of artistic production, and it has its own systematic ways of doing things. I don't do a lot of digital artwork, but I know that there are ways that it's produced that you can put those systems into place as a research methodology. So absolutely, that's absolutely. Thank you very much for that question, Orpha. That's something that we can definitely talk about. And I'm gonna stop the share so I can see your faces. I don't know how much time we have left, Dr. Adriani, if we have time for questions, but I would love to have a chance to just chat over. I knew I threw a lot of information at you, but I wanted to have a chance for people to ask questions. Is that okay? Do we have enough time?
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, here's a question from Aziza. My understanding based on your explanation is that comics-based research is an approach that uses comics as a source or research object to investigate certain topics. What needs to be prepared apart from cards or papers so the data obtained is valid? That's a good question, because the standards of research rigor and arts-based research are a little bit different. In comics-based research, or in any kind of arts-based research, really, when you're gathering data, you're going to do all of the same things that you might do with any other qualitative study. You're just going to be focusing much more on visual material, but you'll be analyzing it in the same way. Early on, I said that only good science makes good art and only good art makes good science. We go back to what is good science. We can use all the standard measures of reliability and validity that we might use in anything else. A lot of comics-based research, and I think I harped on this a little bit much. Comics-based research really draws from your own feelings as a field worker, and really draws from your experience when you're interacting with children and families in the field, or teaching children and doing research on your own practice. You're the instrument. The human being is doing that work. And that's a wonderful thing to tap into. I believe that there's a lot of power in understanding and reflecting on our feelings and our personhood and what we're doing in the field with children. But that doesn't mean we don't need to bracket it and pay attention to it and realize that our feelings and our impulses are not true. They're not what's really happening. So we can use it, but we need to be very, very reflexive about managing subjectivity in the field in that way. Does that help a little bit?
Sally, I think there is also a question in the Q&A.
Oh, I missed the Q&A. It's like another window. I only see one question in the Q&A, and that was applicable to digital artwork. And I said, yes, digital artwork is a completely legitimate form, and fascinating and new and very exciting. Oh, here's a question. Is there any difference between drawing, cartoon, and doodling? There really isn't. I mean, in terms of, a lot of people want their cartoons to look like the little squares, like a comic book, and have it go from one to the next. I don't do that in my style. So the practice is the same. When I think about doodling, though, I think about it in terms of data analysis. You're sort of visual memoing, you're drawing things as you're reading through something. It's a little more informal, but it comes from the same skill set. Also, when you're drawing in your sketchbook to really develop the skills and the practice to draw every day, doodling is a perfectly legitimate form of doing that. Right. Okay, there may be a perspective, but clarification. Okay, great. Thank you, Diana. Without interviewing the child, instead the child walks you through and interpret the drawings about. Absolutely. Yes, that is 100% correct. In my experience, I find this helpful. May I know why you do not believe in interviewing children? I find it very challenging. Yes. Yeah. I think that, I mean, I don't interview children because in my experience, and this is a Western experience, I want you to keep in mind that my experience is very much located where I am. When I sit down to interview a child, that's not a form of discourse that they're familiar with. It's like, it feels like an interrogation, because most of the time when adults ask a child a question, the adult already knows the answer to that question. It's kind of like if I asked, I have 3 daughters, and if I asked my daughter, who broke the cookie jar? I'm not asking because I want to know. I'm asking because I already know, and I want her to fess up and confess her guilt. So children, there's a power differential between adults and children. It's very, very difficult to decenter in the interview context unless the child has some power. And I think having a child have drawings that they interpret for us, that we cannot interpret, we cannot do it, they have to do it for us, really rebalances that power a little bit. It's not perfect, but I think it's a lot better than sitting across the table from a child and trying to get adult scale answers out of them. Does that make sense? I mean, a lot of people love to interview kids. Beth Growie and Fred Walsh, who wrote my very favorite book on research with children, they have a whole chapter on interviewing children. And I just sit there and think, oh gosh, I don't know. I'm just very sensitive to that power differential that's happening, I think. Oh, there's another Q&A. Oh, thank you. When interpreting the drawings as data sources, should we use a theoretical framework to do so? Absolutely. Or should we use cultural visual conventions? I think you could do any of those things. I think with the theoretical framework, that makes a real sense for a code book. And I would also be drawing and thinking about what those theories and what those ideas have in play and how they're in use in that context. But I also think that using cultural visual conventions is excellent, especially if you're doing more of a grounded theory approach where you're trying to do theory building and theory making. Then drawing those things really comes from, it has a lot of poetic power and analytic power. So absolutely. I actually have a manuscript that's coming out. I think it's coming out like tomorrow, in Education and Activism, and it's an illustrated manuscript. And at the end, I had to actually write something about my theoretical framework because the editors didn't feel like it came through clearly enough in the way that I'd drawn the manuscript. So there's sometimes a connect and a disconnect with that. Oh, we've got more down here. I have so many windows open, it's hard to see. Let's see. Oh, more from Diana. I think this is the same way how I feel interviewing children, best to change the shared discuss topic. Yes, absolutely. It's tricky, right? Even for those of us working with children in childhood who really, really want to decenter that power differential, it's very difficult to do because it's embedded in the environment. Certainly in my culture, it's embedded. It's very difficult to dislodge. I can't speak to anywhere else, but it's definitely. Oh, since this is not a conventional way, can you show? Oh, yeah, that's a very good question and something I probably should have talked about. Diana is asking us very smartly and kindly, since this is not a conventional way, can you share journals that accept CVR approaches? It's difficult for a lot of reasons. One, because it's difficult to blind it for blind peer review. I've recently struggled with that. It's difficult because what do you do with word limits? Because there are no words. It can be very challenging. What I have typically done, if I've wanted to write something for a journal and I wanted it in comic format, I would send the editor an email saying, hey, I'd like to submit a comics-based piece. And I would send an article about comics-based research, usually one I wrote, but anybody else's, saying this is what it is. This is the kind of work I do. I'd like to submit an article. Would your journal be interested? And so far, only one journal has told me no. That's a lot of journals that are very, very happy about it. I will say that I get a little bit more success doing book chapters because they have more flexibility. but most journals will accept comics-based work if you ask them ahead of time. And I know Professor Adriani and I are both on Pedagogy, Culture, and Society, and I think that I'm working very hard to see if we can accept some comics-based work, because I do think that that would be really fantastic. The other thing to do that's really smart, if you're not sure, is look to journals that have published comics-based work, because once they've published one, they have no reason not to publish another. So the journals I've published in Girlhood Studies, Education and Activism, British Educational Research Journal, another one in Girlhood Studies, another one in Boyhood Studies. So look to see where people like me or Marcus Weaver Hightower or other people doing comics-based work have published. One place that's really, really hot and up and coming that's publishing a lot of comics-based research is public health. I don't know if any of you publish in public health or would see yourselves as public health people doing childhood educational research. Public health journals publish a lot of comics-based work. Yeah. Diana, I'm very glad that you're going to give CBR a go. And Urfa says, I think a journal focused more on visual arts. Sometimes they do. Sometimes the art journals, though, are wary of publishing research. Like it's too much science and not enough art. And then for the other ones, it's too much art and not enough science. So you really need to find a journal or a publication venue that's going to bridge that gap. I'm hoping to do a special issue of Teachers and Teaching that's going to be comics-based. We'll see if they let me do it. But if I do that, I'll send out the call, and perhaps people who are interested in trying comics-based research can send us something for that. It's who you know and who you connect with, and that's an important part.
Okay, does anybody want to ask another question?
I've really appreciated these questions. They've been excellent. And remember, you have my email address. So if you think of questions later, in the middle of the night, middle of the morning, whenever it is for me, and you are thinking, oh gosh, I wish I had asked her that question, you can always email me and I'll answer the question over email to the best that I can. I may not have all the answers. And if I don't know the answer, I'll find someone who knows the answer and send that to you. So please, 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 please do reach out if there's anything that I can do to encourage you to do some drawing at the very least.
Okay, if no one wants to ask more questions, I think we will close the Q&A session. Thank you very much, Professor Sally, for a wonderful presentation. And thank you also, and thank you also everyone for the Q&A session. Now, can you, Professor Sally, give us the closing statement about this topic?
Oh, a closing statement. I've never given a closing statement before. This is new. I would say that my closing statement is that everyone should try to engage in art as scientists, because it will improve the quality of science. It will improve our relationship with our research participants by focusing on our vulnerability, and will grow as scholars by doing something different. Anything we can do that pushes us out of doing the same old thing is good for our scholarship. And anything we can do to decenter the primacy of a conventional text in academic publishing serves to make publishing more democratic and accessible and less part of the Northern European canonical focus. So I'd encourage everyone to give it a try if they possibly can. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sally. It is a pleasure to have you sharing your experience and expertise with us. Hope we can collaborate with you again in the near future. And next agenda is photo session. Everyone, please open your camera. Open your camera. Give us your best smile. We will take a group picture.
Oh, how fun. Oh, that's great.
Is it okay, Sally, to take pictures?
I think it's precious. It's lovely. Oh, fun.
And we are gonna post it in our social media. Is that acceptable for you?
That's perfect. Oh, I love seeing everyone's face. You're all so beautiful.
Okay, everyone ready? Okay, on my count, 1, 2, 3. Okay, more. 1, 2, 3. Maybe another one. Okay. Can we pause C for CSEP? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining the photo
Thank you,
session.
everyone. It was such a pleasure. Such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. We learned so much from you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And sorry, it's very late for you. Thank you so
That's
much.
okay. This is my joy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay,
Bye, everyone.
I'm sorry. Before we end, I will invite our Deputy Director for Program, Mr. Itfuti, to give the e-certificate as our token of appreciation.
Okay, thank you very much, Honorable Director of Simeo CC, Prof. Vina Adrani, then Sally Pirie as the resource person for this webinar. Thank you very much for your contribution and your times to provide all Indonesian, but not only Indonesian participants, but from the other country also for this opportunity, and could engage them to do the research about the comic-based research. It can be more larger and more benefit for our children and our young generation. Last not least, again, we would like to provide you what we say token appreciation as the committee. This is a certificate for you, but this is in soft copy. When you come here, we will provide it to you. And then, thank you very much. This webinar is officially closed.
Thank you.
Thank you
Yes,
so
thank you,
much,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you, Kak Putih.
Thank you so much.
Before we end our program, please find the slide on how to get the e-certificate for participants.
Excuse me.
Participants will be asked to fill out the evaluation form in the link, this link, and the deadline for filling out the evaluation form will due at Thursday, 28 April 2024. The e-certificate will be accessible on this link starting from 30 April 2024. And now we are at the end of the event. I am Takia. On behalf of Simeo CSAP's team, I would like to say thank you for your participation, for being part of the enlightening discussion in cartoon-based research. See you in the next event. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, everyone.
It's time to open our eyes to a bright and promising future. We'll rise to the call of the times and create a stronger tomorrow. Let's start to make a difference, teaching everyone to learn through science, health, and technology. We will share our expertise by promoting knowledge and policies. We can build a better world. Let us take a stand for our visions of hope, bringing future plans for the people to grow in a life. goals through partnership, creating opportunity